talking about, and if we want to even improve from where we are today, there's unfortunately no other way of doing it other than through tuition and through fundraising. But through fundraising is certainly an area that we would like the entire community to be much more involved. But that it does not appear to be a game changer beyond where we are at this point.
So there's a question about what happens. How would we react, or how would we deal with the potential for a tax increase in the middle of a fiscal year? So it's a good question. I mean, there's a tax increase. Actually, we've already experienced a tax increase in Maryland this year for some of our parents. That's taking effect in July, but retroactively to January. The reality is those things are, like many other things, are outside of our control. We do allow for that in our budgeting in a sense, in that our financial aid, firstly I should say that our financial aid committee is a year-round committee, so that if somebody's circumstances change for whatever reason during the course of an academic year, let's say, God forbid, somebody loses their job, they can apply for financial aid then, and they will receive it. In addition, if somebody's circumstances just worsen and they're already on financial aid, but because they pay more tax, or because they take a salary cut, or whatever reason they need more financial aid, they can go back to the committee and ask for an increase in their award. So we do have that built into the process, and the financial aid committee tries to retain some of its budgeted allocation to account for those unexpected events. And based on history, they have a rough sense of what that quantum will be during the course of a year. God forbid if there was a tremendous disaster, if we dipped into a depression and we had massive layoffs, then we, along with every other institution, would be struggling, and we'd have to figure out how to deal with it. But as I said, we can only control what we can control. Now there's another question. All right, so Josh, you probably can answer this question.
I'll take that one. The number that there are a lot of the ways that you can spin numbers in the public school. For instance, any particular school can ignore all of the overhead from the central administration, but the central administration provides them with supervision, support, curriculum, you name it.
Busing.
And so, for someone to focus just on one particular high school and not the system would be a highly misleading. I mean, the school would not be able to exist purely on its own without a central administration. So, I don't know what Dr. Monk is specifically referring to. I haven't looked at the individual schools, but I would suggest that's a very misleading number. When you divide the entire school budget by the number of students, it actually comes up to about $16,000+. Our expenditures per student are only slightly higher than that, maybe about $17,000 per student. So it really is very similar. But again, the public schools right now have 30+ kids in an individual classroom. They have 400, 500, 600, 700 kids in particular grades. There are efficiencies that they have that obviously we can't as a smaller school. So despite that, I think that our cost per student is actually quite reasonable compared to the county.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of points to that. Number one, by the state's own calculation, our cost per student is at or below the state average. Because, and the reason I can say that with authority is because in the education tax credit legislation that we have been pushing, there's a formula in it that determines eligibility of a school for the education tax credit, or parents of a school for the education tax credit, and that formula requires that the school's tuition be at or below the school's cost of educating the student be at or below the state's, and we fit that criterion. So regardless of what Dr. Monk said, based on the state's own formula, we are at that average. So that's number one. Number two, if you look at simply at the cost of what we're doing, and if you compare it actually to other schools that have to maintain their own infrastructure, we are very competitive. So it's not as though we're spending substantially more than the other schools to provide the educational offering that we provide, and in fact, in most cases, we're spending much less.
I'll also point out something which I guess goes without saying, but I think it does need to be said here, which is we're also running a dual curriculum. So while it's true that we don't have a football team and we don't have a marching band and we don't have a full-scale musical, we do have an MJBHA faculty, which also needs to be compensated along with the general studies faculty. So that, all things being equal, would add to our costs as well. So that is something that even taking that into account, our costs are only marginally higher than what the state reports as the average, or the county reports as the average per child cost in the county.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to the next question, but you go ahead.
Oh, no, okay, before we do that, I guess let me just, one other point on this that I think is worth articulating, because I'm sure it's on some people's minds anyway. If you look at our closest counterparts in the community, there are two groups. There's JDS on one end of the spectrum, and there's Yeshiva and Torah School on the other end of the spectrum. Our tuition falls between them. And it, in a way, I think, although you might say that's not surprising, in a way it is somewhat surprising in this sense. We provide far more in the way of educational support and services and breadth of curriculum and extracurricular opportunities than Yeshiva and Torah School do. So it's not surprising that we're more expensive than they are. But it is, I think, somewhat surprising that we're able to do that at a significant discount as compared to JDS. JDS benefits from economies of scale that we don't benefit from because they're substantially larger than us. And yet we provide a lot of the same kinds of opportunities that JDS provides, although not, they do have a broader range than we do in some respects, and yet we're substantially lower than them in tuition and in cost of education. So I think it's worth mentioning as well.
Owning the building affect the budget? Not substantially, because we were paying rent to the county prior to owning the building. Owning the building gives us the security that we will be here hopefully for the rest of all of our lifetimes, and that was the main reason to own the building. Having to move from this location would have been a tremendous expense, even with some kind of compensation from the county. So that was the main reason to own the building. Regardless of whether we leased it or owned it, the building is getting older, and we benefited for 10 to 12 years of relatively recent renovation, and a lot of the parts that we used within the building were relatively new. And now that we are 12 to 14 years into the new building, things start to break down a little bit. This is precisely as Denny Berman had predicted. That's the way that buildings work, and that's why the ground purchase campaign is so important, because not only does it help us pay for the cost of the building, but it also lays the groundwork for the costs that will be associated with owning the building. Again, whether we leased it or owned it, that was immaterial, because we would be responsible for the cost. So every time an HVAC unit goes out, this is not like calling somebody and having $1,000 fix to your home. These machines, these units, can be $25,000 a piece. So that's one of the reasons that the ground purchase campaign is so important. The maintenance and repairs on this building will not impact our annual budget, our operating budget, and hopefully will not impact tuition as well.
We do, yeah. That's all. That's all, of course, 100% correct. The only thing I'll add is that I think owning the building does afford us some opportunities for cost savings or additional revenue that may not have existed previously. For example, we have a little more flexibility in what we can do. The installation of the solar panels, which will help with our energy costs, was a simpler. I'm not even sure we could have done it if we were still renting. It certainly would have been more complicated to have done it. That hopefully will save some money. In addition, we're looking at ways to try to better exploit our building through rental income or through better utilization of food services or other things to generate revenue that would have been perhaps a little more challenging if we were still renting. So there may be some marginal ways that we can benefit financially from owning it, but the main benefit, as Josh indicated, is that we don't have to worry about the significant disruption and attendant expense of having to relocate somewhere else. Okay, so we'll take one more question. I see it's there, and then I think it's getting late, so we'll sign off. A question is asked about whether or not there might be some room for combining administrative functions with the Yeshiva or JDS or presumably Torah School or other day schools in the area. This is something that's come up, and we've talked about it, we've looked at it, we're continuing to look at it. One of the things the benchmarking project that we're doing through YU will do is help us evaluate that a little bit as well. The Federation is spearheading an effort that looks at consolidating some functions. Right now they're focusing on transportation, I believe. We separately have been looking at potentially trying to consolidate our health insurance costs, although Maryland law makes that difficult to do. So the short answer to your question is perhaps. The longer answer is it's complicated to do. In some certain functions, it's not feasible to combine, but we are looking at those possibilities. And if there are ways to do that make sense and that will actually save us money, then we're going to certainly explore them.
And we'll say that over the last 5-6 years, the Federation has looked at this very closely, has convened us a number of times to try to explore ways that we could take advantage of the economies of scale of the system. Really, it's been focused on transportation. No one is that optimistic about being able to find savings in the back office and the front office and other areas. The benchmarking project should help a little bit, at least to give us a sense of what other schools of our size or what other schools spend per student on things like maintenance or other materials. So that will give us a sense of whether we're at least in line with what other schools are doing. But as of now, it does not appear to be a promising avenue for cost savings.
Okay. I think, as I said, we're going to bring the session to a close. It's getting close to 10 o'clock. I really want to thank everyone for dialing in to participate. If you found this to be useful, please encourage others to listen to the recording. Give us a couple of days to get it up on the site, but hopefully by middle of next week it'll be there. And if you have other questions that occur to you at any point, you should not hesitate to reach out either to Josh or to me, and we'd be happy to address them. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, and good night, everyone.